It's our great pleasure to welcome to our 2020 Online Trend Summit long-time collaborator and friend of the Food People, Amelia Boothman, Strategy Director at 1HQ, to bring to life the social, the cultural, and I guess the human narrative behind the top trends for 21-22, and how this era of reset is manifesting itself. Amelia, let's talk about some of the forces that are at the root of the food and drink trend manifestation into the near future.
Oh, thank you, Charles. And it's a real pleasure to be here again in this strange time. But it's great to have so many people join us this year. But I'll miss the chats and questions that I often get with you all. So please do send them in as I go through. But it has been an interesting year in terms of trends, and they're being fast-tracked in our times of change. As predicted by Yuval Harari of Sapiens fame, times of crisis speed things up. So let's see what we've got. Right, so the importance of our macrocultural trends. I thought it'd be worthwhile just talking about this before we look at some of them. And so why do we bother with these? Well, the true meaning of a brand or a service comes alive through the visual, verbal, atmospheric, and experiential ways in which it's delivered. And each sign, code, or symbol can tell a different cultural story through the context it puts itself in, from packaging through to service. Take simple hamburger here we see, be it one from Impossible Burger, McDonald's, or a 3-star Michelin restaurant, each has still got that very different value and meaning. And it's these subconscious messages through the pack design, decor, communications, atmosphere, which brings the experience to life. But how do we identify these? So I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we do this, and also some of the background drivers in our culture that affect new emergent contextual codes. So the food people identify and gather the trends and analyse them and their strength across the world. We at 1HQ then take the imagery and the context of these signs, codes and symbols, and unearth the meaning and culture behind them that actually drives these trends. And here we can see we're going to take you through these big cultural shifting stories today as a bit of interest. But when we work with our clients, we translate these into their unique platforms, and we can then focus down on how to bring those to life in each brand or product's context in an ownable way. As you can see, our big theme this year is Own the Reset, and underneath this are 4 macrocultural trends we'll talk about, and then the 44 drivers that help explain the food and beverage trends we see emerging today. So what are these 44 cultural drivers? Well, each of those 4 macro themes has a number of underlying emotional needs and behaviours that can explain why we desire and want these new foods. Some feel really familiar because they're ever present. Others have emerged more recently. Often, though, they're not completely new, and when we delve into them back into the depths of time, we can actually see this is a cyclical driver repeating itself. These needs and behaviours help us target our brands and products, therefore, more effectively. Let's have a look at that core central driver of the wheel, first of all, and see what's going on there. So, Own the Reset. So post the revolution, which was our centre 2 years ago, there's been a big shift in lifestyle, values and the economy in order to secure the future, our central driver last year. We now see this has driven consumers to make a big shift in their choices and decision making, forcing people to decide how they personally feel and choose to react in times of change. There's also been a reset of responsibilities towards a more self-sufficient and self-contained lifestyle. Last year, we talked about millenarism, documented by Norman Cohn's belief that the socio-political system needs to be reinvented because it isn't working. We now have heeded our heroes and taken matters into our own hands, aligning ourselves with the tribes that we believe can make the positive change needed to reset. Let's look at our first macro trend underneath this. So return to the family. In the time of crisis and revolution, we've returned home to our close family and reknown how to be together, look after, care for, and enjoy their company, hopefully. The majority have surprised themselves by how we have learned to live in our reduced space. And many opinion polls have shown that we actually prefer many things about being restricted to our homes in lockdown. 85% say they want at least some elements to stay from lockdown, according to YouGov. This has even become something to feel proud of. Now we have to learn to live, and now we've learned to live with less in a world where temperance is now valued as a way to help save our planet. So this throws up some questions. Our first is, why has there been a move in food towards happily learning to live with less? So temperance is actually interesting because it's a paradoxical power. So animal behaviour is typically about obtaining and, if possible, monopolising best resources and foods to demonstrate the ability to collect and consume more than rivals, to outcompete them, and to grow the largest physical features possible to prove their fitness. Correspondingly, in the human world, personal power has conventionally been expressed through conspicuous consumption, displays of wealth, accumulation of valuable artefacts, and so on. The aesthetics of asceticism, however, show throughout history there's been a diametrically opposed strand of behaviour and communication, centering on the outright rejection of material accumulation and display. In ancient Sparta, a Spartan existence, among Indian ascetics, and in countless religious figures from Trappist monks to Buddhists, a simple life involving little food or veganism, vegetarianism, celibacy, and rejection of wealth has signified not weakness and failure, but instead personal and spiritual social power. The lockdown has made this ascetic stand more relevant, partly out of necessity, with some faced with fewer options and reduced income, partly based on a desire to actually capitalise on opportunity with more power over our lives, including our diet. Once eating less would have been a sign of failure and low status. Increasingly, it's a mark of a more mature, successful, and wise person. So with authenticity valued as never before, those refusing to engage in wasteful and indulgent behaviours relating to food or other aspects of life are among the most enlightened and powerful. And we see things like diet apps like Noom, intermittent fasting, are growing examples of this. We're entering, therefore, a new phase of rejection of materialism and instead increasing our interest in restraint, minimalism, discipline through increasing awareness of the ethics of environmental damage and waste. Combined with these factors, we're seeing a surge in interest in foods that involve some level of sacrifice for the common good and/or for the individual seeking more control over their body and life generally. Lockdown has accelerated this tendency that was already happening, as people are having to economise and are also opting to use this crisis as a leverage to improve things. Let's go on to our next big driver, filling the vacuum. So fast changes in revolutionary times have unseated traditional leaders who we no longer trust or value, and this has created a bit of a political vacuum. This vacuum has created space, therefore, for new styles and types of leadership to thrive. Scientists, populism, QAnon. Many businesses, scientists, and celebrities have taken a stance and spoken out in ways they've not dared to in the past, where they feel traditional leadership has been lacking. They've also often taken matters into their own hands to reach out to those in need, or directly correct the perceived wrong with actions to make it right. These are proven to be high-risk gambles that initially might even appear to have failed, but then they've often gathered tribal support, which has then overturned the established status quo. So we then ask the question, why has making food affordable for all come to such prominence, which is one of the elements that comes out from this trend? So food for all is really the oldest altruism, as food and drink has always been the most important aspect of existence. In evolution, the way we obtain food via gathering and hunting had a profound impact on our physical characteristics and the patterns of our social organisation. More than that, the sharing of food and altruism relating to food is the very basis of culture itself. Whereas intelligent apes like chimpanzees are reluctant to share food, human infants as young as 19 months show spontaneous giving of foods to others, despite this depriving themselves of nutrients. In the industrial age, food has always been a microcosm of capitalism's dog-eat-dog reality, and hunger is still a major global issue for billions. The rise of public consciousness of food banks and heightened awareness about the amount of food we throw away and the promotion of strategies that reduce food waste have brought food into the wider conversation about the downsides of modern life. The system is seen as rigged, and we are now taking matters into our own hands, where politicians, both left and right, have been seen to fail. The world seems increasingly polarised, in fact, politically and socially, with left versus right, science versus conspiracy theories, and so on. However, all agree on one key thing, that the little man has been seen to be shafted by the system. The right sees government and globalisation as the cause, the left capitalism itself, but both are increasing their demands for a change to the unequal system. And lockdown has exacerbated this, with livelihoods lost, industries shut, and poverty on the rise. And of course, we've all seen Marcus Rashford, our Man United footballer, and his food poverty campaign, which has gained a level of traction in recent months that would have never achieved before. Therefore, there is an increased urgency to provide food solutions that meet new ethical standards, not only for the environmental concerns, but to do with basic human dignity. From biotech finding newer ways to create nutritious foods that could solve global food shortages, to mechanisms that reduce waste and even share food with those who really need it. 2020 has given an added impetus to this altruistic drive, with a strong sense that things should merely not go back to how they were before. So, why is food increasingly at the forefront of the wider cultural drive to also rewild our environment? So we have the idea of man having sought dominion over nature as key to really the rise of civilization. We've sought to control, tame, and transform our natural world for our own purposes for thousands of years. Only in recent times has the environmental movement from the 1970s actually made inroads into public consciousness and become widely popular from a policy perspective. Because such are the depth of the roots in the modern cultural mindset that ultimately it's going to be a case that we have to learn to let the planet control us to some extent rather than the other way around. And campaigners are still needing to make a noise and push for change. Until the last few centuries, nature was respected and revered, even worshipped. And this has always been present in the hunter-gatherer cultures found all over the planet in their thousands. Colin Turnbull's famed ethnography of the Pygmies paints a picture of a kind and gentle people living in harmony with their habitat. Philosopher Rousseau became associated with the idea of the noble savage, part of the wider notion of romantic primitivism, which this claimed that civilizations corrupt humans and that in nature we are purer, a more benign state. The environmental movement has started convincing people to rewild the earth for its own sake, protecting ecosystems, preventing mass extinctions, and so on. There's been an increasing shift towards signifying rewilding as part of a broader movement towards removing the corrupting influence of modern industrial culture. Rewilding can decontaminate us by reducing toxins and microplastics and reconnecting us with the wider natural world, increasing also our well-being. Even the Japanese practice of forest bathing is gaining currency, and the drive to rewild the planet has taken on an ethical dimension to save humankind from its industrial self. In this context, food itself has become more and more attached to the ethics of wildness, with more natural and wilder food not only healthier, but also in a sense more morally potent. Food that damages the environment less, supports local communities, uses less artificial packaging, and ultimately is more sustainable, carries added value. With the wider cultural reset underway, something as fundamental as food and the ethics surrounding it are in focus as never before. So why is demonstrating leadership on moral issues becoming more widespread in popular culture? And how is food really involved in this, is our next question. And this brings us to tribal force and taking a stance. Throughout history, unorthodox ideas have fallen foul of the authorities. Heretics have been burned, scientists like Galileo put on trial, and dissident writers sent to the Gulag. Today, activists and journalists are exiled still and assassinated, etc. Even where life and limb are not under threat, careers are often ruined by taking an overt political stance or ethical stance, so most still avoid this for fear of consequence. However, increasingly taking a stance on issues has become not only more common, but demanded. This shift preceded lockdown. The controversy surrounding Colin Kaepernick initially saw him out of a job, but eventually Nike took up his fight as their own fight, a commercial masterstroke it turned out. In 2020, we've seen an explosion in overt expressions of social positions, from Naomi Osaka to Lewis Hamilton and the Premier League's regular taking of the knee to support Black Lives Matter. Demi Lovato's Commander-in-Chief is an unprecedentedly explicit political song. Psychologists have proven that when people make a declaration to others, it has two effects. First, it makes them more likely to stick to their guns, to follow with more actions and public declarations, which makes those views more entrenched and firmly held. Second, when one person declares something you believe in, you're more likely to follow suit with a public declaration yourself. Thus, an avalanche of public declarations reinforces and deepens passions. FMCG has traditionally shied away from taking sides in cultural issues, unless non-controversial. But we now see food as becoming a locus for activism itself, carrying social messaging beyond the brand into society at large. Once niche activists like Ben & Jerry's are now leading others like McDonald's and Burger King to make statements that are less cliched and generic and more like missionary statements. So if we come on to the macro driver of tribal force. So revolution establishes new thought leaders, and minority tribes find their voices through their collective connected communities. This is a local and global phenomenon. Memberships of these tribes is validated through demonstrating their skills, knowledge, and commitment. And so we now see experts sharing their crafts and expertise online for others to see how skilled they are in order for them to prove their value. Consumers are also now identifying themselves with tribes by adopting, learning, and sharing their new skills that explicitly show how they too can become valued members. So why has authentic self-improvement, very often linked to diet and fitness, come to be linked so closely with one's social status, is the question that we ask. Proving and improving yourself is as ancient as culture itself. The further we go back in time, the more this self-development was linked to a sense of social status and meaning. Being part of a tribe includes traditions to undergo transformation, often through rites of passage, which see a transition from child to adult, like the vine jumping tradition in Vanuatu, or in epic myths that represent a hero's journey from Odysseus to King Arthur. By contrast, in the modern world, self-development has been a mostly private matter, pursued diligently in the background until at least there were some noticeable results for all to see. Our social media, of course, has changed all that. Self-improvement has become something you display publicly, making announcements of goals and updating progress. Influencers have gained social status by communicating an idealized life to which others aspire. However, authenticity has become an issue, as we all know. Many suffer mental health problems, with some now confessing the reality doesn't match the image. Increasingly, therefore, people are stripping back the illusion and revealing their true self, communicating primarily an inner journey, more honest and real. At the same time, with people still wanting to improve and grow, sharing progress online during lockdown has become a form of therapy, but also a way of gaining social respect. And so social status is increasingly linked with being respected as real rather than idealized as glamorous. And it rests on developing skills, expertise, and knowledge over merely signaling excellence. So food is increasingly a space where people are being given the opportunity to grow and display their achievements and gain respect and recognition. Moving away from the common Instagram practice of showing you eating great food in a cool venue again, now the focus is more on making that food and the skills necessary. And we see some examples like the tablescaping trend helping to demonstrate this DIY excellence. If we go to our final macro driver, this is the resilience and change. In these fluid times of crisis, the fast-changing environment has become an accelerant to change, where the winners are the businesses, governments, and people who have been able to move fast, seize the opportunity, and deliver to the new emerging needs. Consumers are searching for clever ways to break through and hack your health status or bring exclusive quality to you, the inaccessible consumer. The biggest winners are those using technology in dynamic spaces in new ways that work around whatever constraints are thrown at them to deliver us the experience we've come to expect through whatever channel is available and desired. In fact, Professor Stephen Taylor, author of The Psychology of the Pandemic, says resilience is the most likely long-term psychological outcome of this pandemic. So why are tech and physical spaces being exploited in these new dynamic ways for food and drinking experiences? Well, biologists broadly divide animals in two. Specialists are highly adapted to one niche and can only really feed on restricted foodstuffs, such as pandas and koalas. They're in essence less adaptable and therefore more prone to extinction. Generalists, on the other hand, can eat a variety of foods and thrive in a range of habitats. Raccoons are one example. They live in a wide variety of environments, including forests, mountains, and large cities, and can feast on everything from fruit and nuts to insects, frogs, and even human rubbish. Businesses can be looked at as corporate organisms. The adaptable ones are more agile, flexible, and generalist. Guerrilla marketing, once a fringe strategy, has come to prominence as low-cost and relevant messaging that resonates with what is happening today. Newsjacking, another technique for gaining visibility, the idea of co-opting a piece of news that chimes obliquely with what you're selling. This is about pragmatism, not purism. From the point of view of company survival, it's about whatever works, essentially. Companies able to mix up their offerings, change their channels, delivery systems, even the products themselves, have been able to adapt much more effectively than those with more purist approach. But interestingly, when describing these stories, the language of Darwinism is common, with references to survival, adaptation, and thriving, and with many examples emerging of companies prospering by thinking on their feet and changing how they do things. So the new normal in food is rapid adaptability and change. Whereas pop-ups have tended to be novelties, now they're opportunistic for capitalizing on restrictions. A drive-through restaurant, once a way to engage in experiential branding, now has become a lifeline for businesses and hugely welcome as an excursion for our frustrated diners. And whereas home deliveries and subscription services had been increasing over recent years as a gradual evolving way of increasing convenience, they're now vital to bring and sell food and drink. But they're also an opportunistic way to engage in experiential branding. All of this, of course, has been fast-tracked by the lockdowns, but was already emerging and relevant. So finally, how to apply these trends. So the issue with trends is everyone's got loads of them, but which should you use and how do you implement them to your brand in a unique way? It's the cultural codes that can be carefully selected to represent the unique meaning of your brand in culture and society. Overlay these with food codes and together you get your own special unique proposition. That might sound very clever, but in fact, you already have many of the ingredients to do that within your business. And the magic is just creating the right jigsaw puzzle and then implementing that consistently using the relevant signs, codes, and symbols. So thank you, and thank you, Charles, for inviting me here again today. And any questions, please send them on the chat link. I'd love to answer them.
Amelia, wow. Thank you so much for that taster, that insight behind owning the reset and the drivers of return to family and filling the vacuum and tribal force, and of course the last one, resilience in change. And what a year of epic change it has been, and how the landscape has moved on at pace since we were last together at the Royal Horticultural Halls this time last year. It's been a great pleasure, as always, to welcome you as the keynote speaker to our 2020 Trend Summit in this new format for this year. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. And it's been lovely to get the chance to talk to so many people this time. So good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Thanks again on behalf of us all. Thanks, Amelia.
Pleasure.